Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of GameChanger Conversations. The team at GameChanger Law Advisors is excited to launch this new video-based initiative where we engage with leading speakers and entrepreneurs from different walks of life and explore the interaction between law and various other walks of life as well. In this, the inaugural edition of GameChanger Conversations, we have with us Mr. Srikrishna Sridhar Murthy, founder and CEO of Sattva Consulting. This is the first conversation that we as a team are having with various clients, and really gracious of you to accept this invitation.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So just a very quick round of introduction. So Krishna is a BITS Pilani graduate and an INSEAD School of Business graduate. He is a computer science engineer and co-founded Sattva in 2009 after having done stints with Dell as well. So Krishna, just perhaps you could add to that with a slightly more detailed description of yourself and Sattva as well for the benefit of our viewers.
Got it. So I graduated from Pilani in 2002, computer science, and like most Indians at that time, IT and tech were things we were doing. Worked for Dell for about 5 years, but that was the time I also got very deeply involved in the non-profit ecosystem, in the CSR part of Dell, and that got me exposed to a lot of the work that non-profits were doing. People like Dream a Dream, Janagraha, Makkala Jagrati, and some of these guys. And that exposure kind of got me thinking whether these were some of the problems that I wanted to be involved in kind of solving. From there on, decided to go to INSEAD to understand much more about how the world works, because as an engineer, you understand in a very limited way. And then INSEAD gave me that kind of understanding of economics and social innovation and how just business works. And from there on, decided to consolidate a lot of my learning into creating Sattva. And when we started Sattva, the primary focus was to see how we can do impact at scale, because my learning from working with non-profits till then was primarily that we were looking to solve problems on the ground in smaller scale, but how do we take it to kind of larger scale, and execution was always a key challenge in non-profits, which Dell was very, very good at. So I was really trying to bring that learning and say, can we impact at scale? And that's really how Sattva was born with my other co-founders. And today, we're a growing consulting and solutions firm in the impact space, working across India and other parts of the world. And really focused on still the same objective of how do we create impact at scale.
So yeah, maybe step back a little bit. 2009 was when Sattva was started.
Yeah.
And at that particular point in time, I don't know if there was too much of a conversation in India on creating an impact ecosystem. I don't even think we had too many impact investors at that point in time. The SKS story had not yet played out the way it did eventually.
Yeah.
So what inspired you and your co-founders to think about doing something as radical as setting up a CSR consulting firm at that point in time when the CSR law also did not exist as well?
Oh,
so yeah, maybe some thoughts in terms of how did Sattva come about?
Absolutely. So I think our focus, based on our experience at that time, was really to focus on impact, and CSR, impact investing were all kind of things that were still coming into the ecosystem. I think the most ignorant thing about us was we didn't know there was not an ecosystem. We thought this was already what people were kind of doing. I think, or probably it's fair to say that the ecosystem has changed drastically. The current ecosystem didn't exist, but there was another ecosystem. You had the World Banks, the DFIDs, the USAIDs, multilateral organizations, aid agencies. They've been around, and they had created these non-profit ecosystems which were doing some good work at that time. So some of our first customers were some Dutch funders, the World Bank, kind of people. We even attempted to work a little bit with the government at that time in the beginning when we started Sattva. So I think that ecosystem was there, and I think we were coming more, I would say, to change that ecosystem, because we were trying to bring in business thinking into that, more operational thinking, and we were also trying to talk about scale, and we were trying to bring in a lot more I would say focused approach on impact from the perspective of building institutions and not just projects, because at that time one of my learnings was also that it was a lot more project driven, program driven kind of an approach, and the focus was very, very strongly on the entrepreneur rather than an institution. There was a lot of fellowships, the Ashoka and many others, who focused on the entrepreneur. Whereas my learning from a lot of the other things that I'd done was the development of the institution was very, very important. So these were the things we were trying to, in some sense, slowly disrupt. I think what happened over the next course of that years to come was more the shift in that ecosystem started to happen. The big aid agencies started to go away. The new philanthropy started to kind of come in. Philanthropy has now today become so much more strategic that institution building has become the core conversation, which we started doing about 8-10 years ago. We tried doing CSR 10 years ago and it was not very successful, and probably for two reasons. A, we were not very influential in changing the thinking of corporates at that time. There was no law, obviously, and more importantly, I think we were sitting in an ecosystem like Bangalore, which was not, even today, not probably the most progressive from a CSR, perspective. So I think a lot of those we learned in our first phase was that the impact focus at scale and the new story we were bringing, we were probably a little bit ahead, a few years, but then the rest of the pieces got, very well, I think, laid out over the next 5-7 years with the law, with like I said, the new philanthropy ecosystem coming, more talent coming, more technology coming. I think all of that has made, Sattva's way of work a lot more, I would say, relevant to the way impact, is being delivered.
Sattva in Sanskrit means true essence and consciousness. Can you throw some light on how you came to choose this name for your organization, and how does it relate to CSR?
So I think for us, in some sense, the meaning of Sattva was more equilibrium, a balance. That's the interpretation with which we kind of entered, or chose the name. Interestingly, pre-Sattva, there was also a small non-profit that I had set up with a few other people, where we were doing more, we were still running the magazine, and also we were doing more non-profit consulting for some of the organizations in Bangalore. And, the magazine's name was Sattva at that time. When we started the company, I think the lack of creativity of all the founders, we couldn't come up with another name which was better than Sattva. And one of our mentors, who you know very well, he suggested that, hey, your magazine you can always rename. I think this is a great name for the work that you guys are envisioning to do, so why don't you kind of move the name here? And that's kind of how the original name of Sattva kind of moved into, to the company. I think the fact that, and today if you look at, from our work to our logo to everything else, we are very focused on balance. It's really the balance between society and profit, balance between business and social, balance between your personal aspiration and ambition to, at the same time, your the work that you have to do from an impact point of view. You have doing well and doing good, there needs to be a balance. So we've continued with that interpretation of being balanced about your approach in everything that you do. Obviously, it's not all social. It can't be all business. It can't be, again, all non-profit, all for-profit, and it can't be all work and no time for yourself. So all of those, I feel, is really something where we're trying to find the middle path in some sense, where we hope the actual direction we take is impact, but how we do it is in a balanced kind of a way.